All right, so we're diving into rework today. I feel like everyone who is interested in shaking things up in business has had this book recommended to them at some point.
Yeah, definitely a popular one, and for good reason.
Seems like almost every traditional business idea gets thrown out the window in this one, right? Like ditching the whole fundraising thing and even questioning the need for a super detailed business plan.
You're not wrong. Jason Fried and David Heinemeier Hansson definitely don't follow the usual path with their ideas. I guess you could say they poke at pretty much all the sacred cows in business.
Before we get into the specifics, I'm kind of curious, what's like the biggest business myth that you are ready to rework?
Hmm, that's a good question to start with. I think a big one for many is this idea that you absolutely need a ton of money, a huge amount of capital to even get started.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And rework really pushes back against that, right?
Totally. Right off the bat in the first section, Go, they lay out this idea of actually embracing limitations.
Embracing limitations,
Fair.
interesting.
Yeah. Their argument is that starting small, even bootstrapping, can force you to be more resourceful and creative because you just don't have those big resources to fall back on.
So it's like that old saying, necessity is the mother of invention. Constraints actually can breed innovation.
Exactly. They even go as far as comparing it to Shakespeare's sonnets. All
Hmm.
those strict rules in a sonnet, the 14 lines, the specific his rhyme scheme, all that, it didn't stifle his creativity at all. In fact, it forced him to get really creative with his language. And honestly, some of his most powerful work came out of having to work within those limitations.
So instead of just seeing limitations as like roadblocks, rework is saying that we should try to view them as opportunities to come up with new
Yeah,
ideas.
think of it like a springboard.
Mhm.
Limitations can actually launch you forward.
They use that example of James Dyson too, right? Like he was super frustrated with vacuum cleaners clogging all the time, so he just went ahead and invented the bagless vacuum.
Yep, scratched his own itch, as they say.
Hmm.
And in the process, he solved a problem that millions of people had.
I think that's key, right? It's not just about scratching your own itch, but finding that sweet spot where your passion overlaps with a need that lots of other people have.
Definitely. And, another thing they push back on is this idea that you have to wait for the perfect time to get started.
Oh my gosh, the I don't have enough time, I don't have enough resources, I need to do more research, all those
Yep.
excuses.
But Rework would say, no time is no excuse. Start now. They'd even go as far as to suggest maybe cut back on things like TV or other leisure activities to make time for your goals
That's where discipline comes in, I guess. It's about making conscious choices with your time.
and focusing on what really matters.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times, though, it's not just about the time. It's about feeling overwhelmed and lost. Like, where do I even begin with all of this?
Okay. Yeah, I've definitely felt that.
So that's where their idea of focusing on the epicenter comes in.
What is the epicenter exactly?
Okay, imagine a hot dog stand. What's the absolute most important thing there?
Well, the hot dog, obviously.
Exactly. The hot dog is their epicenter. That's their core product. Everything else basically revolves around that hot dog. And they say this can apply to any business. You need to figure out that one essential element, the core offering that defines your whole business.
So it's like finding your North Star, that one guiding principle that keeps you on track.
Yeah, it prevents you from getting pulled in a million different directions. And once you've figured out what that epicenter is, Rework has another somewhat radical piece of advice. They say, ignore the details early on. Perfection comes later.
Wait, really? Isn't paying attention to detail important, especially in business?
It definitely is, but their argument is that getting too caught up in all the tiny details early on can actually slow you down.
So it's more about getting a solid base and then iterating from there.
Yeah, refining and perfecting as you go along.
Because a lot of the time, you don't really know what needs tweaking until you actually have something to work with.
That's the Rework philosophy for sure. Action over endless planning.
They have that great line too. Launch now, perfect later.
Exactly. No more waiting for the perfect moment or the perfect product.
What about quality though? Most people want to make sure what they're putting out there is really good, top notch.
They would argue that waiting for perfection can sometimes lead to, never actually launching anything. It's kind of like analysis paralysis. You get so stuck in the planning phase that you never actually do anything. They use that analogy of Tiger Woods using really cheap golf clubs. Would he suddenly be less talented just because the equipment isn't perfect?
Right, right. So it's more about focusing on the value you're providing instead of getting stuck on having every little thing polished up from the start.
Exactly. And this leads to another key concept in this section, the idea of being a curator.
A curator like in a museum.
Exactly. Think about what a curator does. They very carefully choose and arrange items to tell a story, to create a certain experience for visitors. Rework says that businesses should do the same thing. Be really intentional about simplifying, streamlining, and focusing on the essential elements.
That's like cutting out all the clutter.
Exactly. Both in your actual product, your service, and even in the way you operate your business. And this mentality extends to how they approach failing ventures too. Instead of just throwing more and more resources at a problem, they suggest trimming things down to the bare minimum and really focusing on what's actually working.
So like instead of adding more and more, sometimes you need to step back and take some things away.
Precisely. Kind of like pruning a plant. You got to cut back the dead weight to allow the healthy parts to flourish.
So we've talked about make a difference, no time is no excuse, you need less than you think, and start a business, not a startup. That's a lot to unpack in just the first section of the book.
We're just getting started. There's so much more to cover in Rework, and I think the next section, Progress, might just challenge a few assumptions about how we think about moving forward in business.
Okay, I'm ready for it.
All right, so let's dig into Progress. This section is all about, well, moving forward, but in a way that fits with the whole Rework mindset.
Okay, makes sense.
One of the first things they tackle is this idea of competition.
Competition. Oh, interesting. I feel like you always hear about needing to beat the competition, stay ahead of the curve, all of that.
Right, and they actually tell us to, get this, stop obsessing over the competition.
Whoa, okay, that's kind of radical. I mean, especially in the business world, everyone is always talking about market share and like getting that competitive edge.
You're not wrong, but their argument is that constantly looking over your shoulder at what other people are doing can actually stifle your own creativity.
You start comparing yourself to others and maybe end up just copying what's already out there.
Exactly. Like trying to trace a masterpiece. You might be able to get the surface details, but you're missing all the depth and the real artistry underneath.
So it's more about focusing on what you're bringing to the table, your unique perspective and vision.
Exactly. They use this great phrase, pour yourself into your work. It's about really putting your own spin on things, your passion, your creativity, all of that. That's what sets you apart from everyone else.
Because, I mean, what's the point of building a business if it's just a copycat version of something that already exists?
Right. And they also challenge this assumption that businesses need to constantly be one-upping their rivals to succeed.
It's like with software updates, how every new version needs to have a million new features, even if it makes the product more complicated to use.
Exactly. But Rework would say, sometimes less is more. Simpler, more streamlined products often actually win out in the end.
Like how simple bicycles are making a comeback.
Yeah, people are moving away from those super high-tech bikes with all the gears and features and going back to the basics.
It's a good reminder that a lot of times people just want something that's easy to use and understand.
Okay, switching gears a little bit, let's jump into the evolution section.
Sounds good.
This section is about how to navigate a business world that's always changing and how to adapt when things are shifting.
That feels especially relevant now. Everything moves so fast.
You're not wrong. And one of the first things they say is, learn to say no.
Ooh, that's a tough one, especially when you're just starting out and want to say yes to every opportunity.
It can be hard, but they make a really good case for the power of saying no.
So you can focus on what's really important.
Exactly. They use the example of ING Direct Bank, which was super successful by really simplifying what they offered and saying no to complex stuff.
It's like by saying no to some things, you're actually saying yes to what matters most.
Totally. And along similar lines, they say to let your customers outgrow you.
Wait, what? Isn't the goal to keep your customers happy so they stick around?
It is, but what they're getting at is you don't want to become too reliant on any one customer.
Because their needs might change.
Right. And if you only focus on pleasing one specific customer, you might end up making your product or service less appealing to a wider audience.
So it's about finding that balance between taking care of your current customers, but also staying open to new possibilities and evolving with the market.
Precisely. It's about not getting complacent and being willing to adapt, even if it means some customers eventually move on to something else that fits their needs better.
That can be a tough one to swallow, especially if you've really poured your heart into building something.
It's about having that long-term vision. You know, the business landscape is always changing, and what worked yesterday might not work tomorrow.
You got to be willing to roll with the punches.
Exactly. And then on a slightly different note, they talk about this balance between enthusiasm and priority.
Oh, this is a good one. I tend to get really excited about new ideas, but I often struggle with figuring out which ones to actually focus on.
You're definitely not alone.
Yeah.
Rework warns against letting initial excitement about an idea totally cloud your judgment.
Okay, so how do you tell which ideas are actually worth pursuing and which ones are just like fleeting bursts of inspiration?
They suggest writing those ideas down, but letting them simmer for a bit before jumping in.
Give yourself some space from the initial excitement.
Right. Come back to them later with a fresh perspective.
And then they also talk about at-home good products.
Yeah. Have you heard that phrase before?
Not really. What does that mean?
It's basically products that, might not have super flashy packaging or the biggest marketing campaign, but once you get them home, they just deliver.
They're not trying to wow you with all the bells and whistles. They just get the job done.
Exactly. They win you over with their actual substance, not just surface appeal. And, this ties back to their overall idea of keeping things simple and focusing on the core value you're providing.
Letting the actual results speak for themselves.
Right. So are you ready to jump into the world of promotion?
Let's do it. This should be good. Okay. Promotion. This is where I'm expecting some real unconventional wisdom, because Rework definitely doesn't seem like a book that follows the typical marketing playbook.
You're definitely right about that. And they start off this section with a suggestion that might seem kind of counterintuitive. Embrace obscurity.
Embrace obscurity. But isn't the whole point of promotion to, like, get as much visibility as possible?
That's the traditional thinking, yeah. But Rework suggests that there's a real benefit to, flying under the radar a little bit, at least at first.
So it's like having that space to figure things out before you have all eyes on you?
Exactly. It's like having a dress rehearsal before the big opening night.
Yeah.
You can test things out, get feedback from a smaller group, and tweak things as you go without the fear of a total flop.
I can see that, yeah. When you're first starting out, it's probably more important to focus on perfecting your product and less on trying to be everywhere all at once.
Right. And then when you're ready to connect with a wider audience, Rework suggests shifting your focus from customers to building an audience.
That's an interesting distinction. What's the difference between a customer and an audience in this context?
So a customer is someone who, they make a purchase and that might be it. But an audience is more like a group of people who are really interested in what you do. They're invested in your journey. They're following along.
So you want people to connect with your brand on a deeper level.
Exactly. And they say you can do that by sharing your knowledge, your insights, your expertise, whether it's through writing, speaking, videos, whatever works for you. It's all about providing value, building trust, and turning those customers into, real fans.
So it's about becoming a thought leader in your space.
Exactly. And they have this, it's a bit of an edgy analogy for this approach. They call it the drug dealer model.
The drug dealer model. Okay, I'm a little scared, but also curious. What exactly does that mean?
Don't worry, they're not actually advocating for any illegal activities. It's a metaphor.
Yeah.
Basically, they're saying, give away some valuable content or free samples up front to entice people to come back for more.
So it's like those free samples at the grocery store.
Exactly. You try a little bit, you'll like it, and now you're more likely to buy the whole thing. You're hooked.
It's about showing people what you've got.
And they also talk about how there's no such thing as an overnight success.
That's so true. It's easy to look at a business that's doing really well and assume they just, popped up out of nowhere.
But in reality, there's almost always years of hard work behind that.
Yeah, it's like that saying, the overnight success that took 10 years to happen.
Exactly. So while it's great to have big dreams and goals, it's also important to be realistic about the journey, and be prepared for the long haul.
Okay, let's talk about hiring, because I think this is something a lot of businesses struggle with, especially as they start to grow.
Yeah, for sure. And Rework has some, again, kind of unexpected advice here. They say to do the work yourself first.
Really? I always thought the goal was to delegate and free yourself up to focus on bigger picture stuff.
There's definitely a time for that, but they're saying that when it comes to hiring, having firsthand experience of the roles you're hiring for is super valuable.
Because then you really understand what the job entails.
Exactly. You'll be able to write a better job description, ask more insightful interview questions, and just overall make better hiring decisions.
So it's about having actually walk the walk before you try to find someone else to do it.
And they also say to only hire when you absolutely have to, like when the workload is truly too much to handle.
It's about growing sustainably.
Right. Don't scale up too quickly. And this next piece of advice, I love this. Hire slowly.
Yeah, I think it's easy to feel pressure to fill positions quickly, but taking your time is usually better in the long run.
Rework compares hiring too quickly to being at a party surrounded by strangers.
Oh, I get that.
It can lead to a lack of connection, miscommunication, and just an overall feeling of, uneasiness. It's much better to build a team slowly and carefully, finding people who are not only good at what they do, but who also fit the culture and share the company values.
So taking the time to find the right people is key.
And then, in true rework style, they challenge this traditional idea of relying on resumes and formal credentials.
So instead of looking at where someone went to school or what their last job title was, it's more about what they've actually done.
Exactly. Focus on skills and experience, not just pieces of paper. Look for evidence of what they've actually accomplished in the real world.
And they talk about how important it is to hire great writers.
Clear communication is so important in any business. And strong writing skills are essential for pretty much everything from marketing materials to internal documents.
And when it comes to hiring managers, they say to look for people who empower their teams.
Yeah, find leaders who inspire, motivate, and create an environment where people can do their best work.
And they also suggest looking beyond geographical limitations, right?
Right, with all the technology we have today, you can work with talented people from all over the world.
Okay, so we've got promotion and hiring covered. What's next?
Let's talk damage control. Every business is going to run into challenges and setbacks, so it's important to have a plan for dealing with those tough situations.
Damage control. Not the most fun topic, but definitely a necessary one.
For sure. And the first thing Rework says is, own your mistakes. Don't hide bad news.
It's kind of counterintuitive, right? Our natural instinct is to try to downplay or cover up mistakes.
Totally. But they argue that being open and honest is actually the best approach, especially when things go wrong.
It's about maintaining trust.
Exactly. They talk about the Exxon Valdez oil spill, where the company tried to downplay the situation, and it just made everything so much worse.
It's almost always better to be upfront about problems.
And they also emphasize how important speed is.
So respond quickly to customer issues.
Exactly. A fast response can often prevent things from escalating. It shows that you care and that you're taking the issue seriously.
And they also encourage leaders to get directly involved.
Yeah. Get on the front lines. Talk to your customers directly. They use the analogy of chefs and waiters interacting with diners to show how valuable that direct feedback loop is.
It's about getting out of the office and talking to the people who are actually using your product or service.
Exactly. All right, last stop on our rework journey. Let's talk about culture. This is where it all comes together, the values, the beliefs, the environment.
The vibe of the whole company.
Exactly. And Rework stresses how important it is to create a positive and supportive work environment.
They talk about building trust and giving people the freedom to do their best work.
Yeah, cultivate trust, freedom, and responsibility. It's about treating people like adults, empowering them to make decisions, and not micromanaging every little thing.
And making sure people have a good work-life balance.
Because no one does their best work when they're burnt out. And then, I love this, they say, be yourself. Drop the corporate jargon.
Yeah, just talk like a normal human.
Exactly. They even call out specific phrases to avoid, like ASAP, because they say it creates this unnecessary urgency and stress.
So ditch the formality and be real.
So there you have it, a whirlwind tour of Rework. It's a book that really challenges the way we think about business and offers a whole new perspective on how to build something that's both successful and fulfilling.
And they leave us with this challenge to ignore the naysayers, to go after what we want, and to embrace that starter mentality, that willingness to just dive in, experiment, and learn as you go.
So one final question to leave you with. What outdated business rule are you ready to rework?
That's a great question. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Rework. We hope you found it helpful. Until next time.